Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to share with you some thoughts and comments that I have with regard to a film that is directed by Federico Fellini, and it appears as part of the set which is called Essential Fellini that was released by the Criterion collection early this year, 2020. Now, the film appears as disc 7, or on the 7th disc, which is part of this overall great package from Criterion. And that film in question is one that was released in 1960, and it is one of the most famous films that has ever been created, and it is so dynamic and bold even now. And I'm speaking about the one, the only, La Dolce Vita. From 1960, and it is directed by Federico Fellini, and the story is credited as being by Fellini and Flaiano and Pinelli, and also Brunello Rondi is included as being credited for the screenplay, as well as the other three, with other collaborators with Fellini, such as Otello Martelli and Nino Rota and Piero Gherardi and others, as well as the cast, headed, of course, by Marcello Mastroianni as Marcello, the main character of the film. This is, of course, the epic masterpiece by Fellini, that is La Dolce Vita. What to say about this film that has already been said? Now, I admit that I can only describe it in my crude and inept manner that is not at all equipped to handle all the nuances and themes and structures that are integrated into this masterpiece. However, if I were to try to give it my best shot, as it were, I think we can start with like what we usually do, which is trying to get at the essence of what the story is and see what we can derive from that, or where that can lead us. And if we were to think about the story terms of this film, La Dolce Vita, I think we can, of course, identify the focus on the main character, our protagonist, our quote-unquote hero, but I use the air quotes gesture in a very purposeful manner. But this is Marcello, played, of course, by Marcello Mastroianni, who is, for all intents and purposes, a type of journalist, living and working in Rome during this period of 1960s, so the late 1950s, entering into a new era, 1960s, and indeed it is indeed, in many ways, a type of new era for Italy and also for Rome. And that vibe and that atmosphere is very palpable, and it is in the air with every single scene that we see in this film from the very get-go. But this is the backdrop against which the character of Marcello goes from essentially episode to episode to episode within this episodic structured film. And we meet various personages along the way that he meets. We get into various situations that involve maybe certain associations that are made through his profession, or we see certain associations that he has on a personal level. Maybe there are other associations that he has on a more intimate level or romantic level, and then also on a familial level. But all the way, we see how these relationships and connections have their effect on Marcello, or perhaps they don't have an effect on Marcello, and how that in and of itself is a kind of reflection of the what might be called the Fellini-esque type of joie de vivre that we see expressed in these various episodes with Marcello as our guide and leader through this journey. A kind of joie de vivre, but also perhaps it could be also be associated with a Dante-like descent into hell and madness. Because what this is also a supreme expression of what we've seen in many a Fellini film in the past, namely a type of cinematic, poetic expression of the dynamism that exists between two juxtaposed dueling themes, or dualism, as it were. And if we were to try to describe the story in the context of this discussion of dueling themes, or dualism, or juxtaposed themes, perhaps we can say it's a film about lightness and darkness. It is a film about heaven and hell. It is a film about truth and artifice. It is a film about the old ways and the new ways. It is a film about old Rome and new Rome. It is a film about history and modern technology. It is also about love and disappointment. It is also about life and death, and everything in between. And I really want to circle that one, because it is indeed a film which is called La Dolce Vita, but also has many things to do with death and darkness and disappointment. And I think that is at the heart, not just of this film, but also at the heart of the beating heart, as it were, of the greatness that is Fellini's cinema. That is the way that he is able to capture these contradictions in various performances and also situations of human drama. Here in La Dolce Vita, I would suggest that those contradictions are being encapsulated on every level of how this film is operating. So those levels include, for example, the very micro or intimate level, because we have a character, Marcello, who seems to be based in a world of contradictions himself. He seems to want to have a sense of search of some kind in terms of what it is he is as a human being, but at the same time he seems to be operating in the dynamics of the plot, at least, almost as not just a journeyman and a guide for us, but almost as an empty vessel or a non-character, as it were. So on the one hand, when there are moments where Marcello is allowed to have a sense of introspection and self-reflection, especially, say, when he is engaged in certain relationships that are expressed in the film, and the like, that is when we see a sense of possibility as far as Marcello's own potential for self-discovery and self-analysis. But then there are other moments where he seems to be maybe a guide, is not so much a guide as much as someone who is a passive observer of all the events that are happening. And so there is this dualism between his passivity and his activity as the main character protagonist in the film. And that is made, I think, most pronounced when we see him interact with the various characters that we meet along the way in this film, La Dolce Vita. So I think on the micro level, this sense of the competing contradictions, I think, is very vibrant and very dynamic. And if we go certain levels up in terms of the scale from micro to macro, I think we can also see, for example, the way that class structures are being depicted here. And I'm talking specifically about the moneyed class, and sometimes we see this expressed in terms of the old aristocracy, as we see in the parties and the decadence of the wealth that is on display on the one hand, and also directly also related to the idea of expressions of wealth and decadence, the new money, the new moneyed class. So there is this idea of old money, old aristocracy versus the new money or the new class. And that new class, I think, is also finding expression in yet another level, which is a sense of the old Rome and the new Rome. We see all these images of a historical based environment antiquities that maybe, for example, are based in architecture, or also based in a type of painting, or a type of section of the city, while at the same time being juxtaposed with images that are undeniably examples of the modernization of Rome and modern technology, the way that automobiles are displayed, helicopters, of course, in the famous opening sequence. We also see the way that the rise of the media class, it becomes almost in a way its own class in terms of its influence and also its parasitic nature. So I think in this broad context, we have the film which is expressing this idea of old and new, old traditions versus rising new ones. And that has to do, I think, a lot in the context of a discussion of class. This is also very important, too, when we think of Fellini's films, because perhaps if we think back on the past works of Fellini that we have seen thus far, Nights of Cabiria, La Strada, Il Bidone, the White Chic, Variety Lights, I don't think we've necessarily seen the depiction of, say, maybe classes of aristocracy or new money that we have seen, at least to a certain degree, in a film like La Dolce Vita. And so I think this gives rise to yet another examination and conversation of Fellini and how he treats certain class structures. I mean, for example, you just take the jump from the film like the great film like Nights of Cabiria, and you go into a film like La Dolce Vita. There seems to be this incredible way that he seems to be jumping from a certain part of society on the one hand versus another part of society on another hand. And I think that also has to do in some form or another, and I think Professor in the supplement, Professor Forgash's theory about how this is a true reflection of the times, the 1960s, I think is very apt, because we have to remember, again, borrowing from Professor Forgash's discussion, that this is a film that is also in the 1960s and is a time of economic boom for Italy and for Rome in particular. And so that gives rise to certain wealthy classes that maybe are wealthy because of new money. It also gives rise to certain architectural structures that are representations of modernism or postmodernism, according to Professor Forgash. Also, this is, as I say, providing great juxtaposition with the ancient aspects or the antiquities of Rome as a heritage city. Also, not just as a heritage city, but also the religious or the religiose aspects of these various markers or representations. And so this is, I think, giving or setting forth the possibility that not just we don't see these contradictions being inherently developed or established within the realm of the character examination by Fellini. We don't get it just there, but we also get it in the form of the examination of the environment itself. Rome seems to be this exciting, vivacious, energetic place that is also, and I think very positively so, a place of contradiction. And I think that mirroring of contradiction on the broad level and then on the intimate level, I think, is one of the reasons why this film maintains its sense of powerful dynamism that is, of course, rooted in the times in 1960, but of course it echoes as the years progress, and it still maintains a great degree of power as a Fellini film, but also as a film of Italian cinema, because of those links to a geographic locality that is the place of the moment, that is Rome. So that is the city. Hence La Dolce Vita. And with that, we also have so many other aspects that are being expressed in terms of duality. And I think if we take a step back and look at it almost on an emotional or human level, we can see, of course, the way that men and women are interacting. This is, of course, a very important component in any Fellini film, but it seems to be something that is on display here. We see Marcello meeting, for example, many different women in the film, and we see how he tends to act in certain ways depending on who it is he is with. And I don't mean purely on a sexual or carnal level, but I'm talking also on a human emotional level. And it does give the opportunity not just for an exploration of these dynamics between the sexes, but also it gives the opportunity for a further examination as to Marcello himself, and again going back to the idea of Marcello as character versus Marcello as non-character. So I think it comes full circle in a way that is very much, I think, indicative of how complex a network this film is in terms of its thematic treatments of various points along the way. So that is another, I think, very important aspect to keep in mind. It is also a film that is very cool. It is very iconic, and it feels so cosmopolitan and chic, and it has that air of being chill and just being part of the in crowd. I mean, that whole thing about La Dolce Vita, it's not just a film, it is also an idea and a state of mind, and it was made famous because of this film, La Dolce Vita, and made manifest in many aspects of the film: the look, the decor, the fashion, the photography, and the cool, so suave, ultra cool presence that is Marcello Mastroianni, and the like, combined with the excitement of the score and music, and the way that the camera seems to be living and breathing, going this way and that. But at the same time, Fellini gives us moments of power using the breadth and scope of the wide frame of the camera, where he shows or gives us opportunity to experience characters that are not just enveloped in the sense of sort of a quest for fulfillment on the level of decadence, but also we see moments of isolation and alienation, and we see how the camera is capturing large vistas of environment and empty spaces where characters are alone or almost alone within the frame. So there is this ironic sense of the treatment of space and environment, the idea that people are connected, but are they really connected in terms of who it is they're with? And perhaps there is an empty void, an emotionally empty void that truly exists no matter how many people are existent in the frame. And that sense of the void or alienation is also made manifest in other aspects, as I say, where we have characters isolated or alone in empty spaces that are also expressions of various forms of architecture in the film. So it all comes full circle. The examination of the role of human existence in the film, and the true nature of isolation and alienation versus the nature of the quest for decadence, is linked also with what I was trying to refer to earlier, with the dynamism of the duality between the old and the new, old Rome and new Rome. And then also it comes down to how the characters interact with that. Marcello being our guide, Marcello being a character and a non-character. Is he on some kind of spiritual quest, or is he an empty vessel? And I think that is also made clear in the way that morality is being expressed. The morality of the characters, is it a quest for some kind of spiritual morality, or is it a downward spiral into what might be deemed to be a sense of moral decay? And if that's the case, how is the expression of the media, the paparazzi in question, how is that a reflection of this idea of spiritual morality or moral decay? And I think it all therefore comes full circle in this swirl, this hypnotic and very magical film that is also very deep and depressing and dark and very frightening in terms of where it goes in many of its episodic scenarios. As I say, also comes full circle. This is a film, right? La Dolce Vita. It is about life, but it is also about death and the consequences thereof, and how far we can go before we lose ourselves, and how far we can go before it is too late. I think these and other questions are at the very heart of this film, thus making it so supremely complex, so rich and deep and profound, and so rich and rewarding an experience to watch over and over and over and over again. This is the one, the only film from Federico Fellini, La Dolce Vita. So that is a very brief discussion, in my crude way, of the film La Dolce Vita. But as we know, with the discs that are included in the Essential Fellini box set, we have a number of supplements that are included. Well, first of all, before we get into the supplements, I should point out that this is purported to be based on a 4K restoration of the film. This had also been released by Criterion some years back, and my understanding is that the 4K restoration that was relied upon for this earlier Blu-ray release is the restoration that's also being relied upon for this Blu-ray that's being included in the new box set. So based on my understanding, and granted, I could be wrong, but my understanding is that it is the same restoration being relied upon here as was relied upon in the earlier Blu-ray release from a few years back. I think the presentation is very, it's great and sophisticated, and it's well worth it. It looks very beautiful, and it's great. You're getting a great film and a great presentation, so well worth getting if you haven't already. But I have this also, which is at spine number 733, by the way. And this is also very significant because there are a number of supplements that were included in this earlier individual release of the film that have made their way to this particular disc. But we should be very specific as to what I mean by this. So, well, let me now focus then on what's included in the Blu-ray, and that will hopefully explain specifically what I mean by the relationship between the earlier Blu-ray and the now box set, Essential Fellini. So, in this box set release Blu-ray disc, we have, first of all, the 4th episode of the Second Look series from 1960. And this is, I understand, we had prior episodes of the Second Look series appear on other past discs of this set. But it's great to have this 4th episode, which is featuring, among other people, Fellini himself, but also Ivan Fourneau and Marcello Mastroianni and Alberto Moravia, etc. And they all speak to the phenomena that is La Dolce Vita, and the phenomenon of La Dolce Vita is also linked to what is referred to in the interviews as a kind of scandal that was associated with the release of La Dolce Vita. For example, how certain religious groups viewed aspects of how the film treated religious themes and religious iconography as being almost sacrilegious. And so that created a certain scandal from certain areas of society. Also, there are certain scandals that I think the Second Look program suggests were due to the fact that we have depictions of an aristocratic class or ruling class or moneyed class or wealthy class that are not so positive. And we have a lot of depictions of decadence and maybe going to certain extremes as far as expressions of wealth and sexuality that might be akin to a sense of spiritual and moral decay. And so I think there was a bit of an uproar in terms of what was being depicted vis-a-vis Federico Fellini's expressions as captured in the film La Dolce Vita. So this aspect of the so-called scandal that accompanied the film upon its release is being touched upon in some aspects of the episode of Second Look. So I think that's very valuable it's very valuable to recall and to keep in mind the contemporary reactions to the film at the time. And this is not true for everyone, but there were these certain reactions that did exist, so it's really good to keep this in mind. And we also have to remember, too, that all along the way we get this discussion of Fellini's films as to how much they are Italian neorealism films or how much they are against the grain of Italian neorealism. We've seen this discussion continued from the very get-go, from the first co-directed film that he did, which was Variety Lights. And we get a little bit of that discussion here in this second look episode. So it's really fascinating, actually. So. And I think there are varying interpretations of that. Some people, I understand, believe that this is a very sharp break from the traditions of Italian neorealism that are expressed by Fellini's cinema. Others see it as being very much in keeping with certain traditions of Italian neorealism in the way it's depicting a sense of reality. It might be a sense of reality that is focusing on different pockets of society, granted, but still it is arguably a sense of reality being addressed. And in that way, it could be akin to maybe mirroring or connecting to the tradition of Italian neorealism. And it's a tradition, of course, that we know Fellini came from when we understand his roots in cinema prior to his directorial debut. So that is another interesting engagement and conversation that is ongoing. And then the second look episode goes on, and we have discussions with Marcello Mastroianni and also Yvonne Furneaux, and also there's discussions about Fellini and his working with the actors and actresses and women and Fellini and the like. And so this, I think, is a very illuminating conversation, and it goes further into the details of Fellini's working habits in the context of La Dolce Vita and beyond. So a great episode, Second Look. The Second Look series has been just phenomenal from my point of view, and so it's been so wonderful to have these 4 episodes included throughout the discs of this early part of the Essential Fellini set. So that is great stuff to watch. That is approximately 30 to 31 minutes, by the way. And then we have a supplement, which is an interview with Irving Levine from 1965, a one-on-one interview with Federico Fellini. Such a Levine interview can be found as one of the supplements on the earlier Blu-ray, by the way. And this is approximately 30 minutes where we have an interesting set of questions posed to Fellini. Mostly we have the interviewer asking in English and then Fellini responding in Italian, although there's one moment where Fellini responds in English. But the questions range from, for example, asking Fellini about his temperament as an artist, his sources of inspiration, any filmmakers that he might have been inspired by, any filmmakers that he admires as contemporary filmmakers and the like. That is an interesting conversation, by the way, where he mentions filmmakers like Kurosawa and Bergman and Alfred Hitchcock as well. He talks about this, and also he gives a really great insight into his comments as an interviewee, not just here, but maybe in other interviews that we see in other supplements on the discs of this set. And he says that we should never trust anything that he says in interviews, which I thought was a brilliant line, and it goes at the very heart of the beautiful contradictions that exist not just in the cinema of Fellini, but also in the way that Fellini is expressing himself and showing himself when he is being interviewed. So I thought that was so great. He also speaks about his work with other directors like Rossellini and the like, and also how he deals with the issue of interpretation of his films. So in those aspects, I think it is a very insightful interview, and it's well worth checking out. This is, again, approximately 30 minutes. That's not all, because then we get an essay, a visual essay, which is also accompanied by a narration. And this is by Kogo Nada from 2014, called The Eye and the Beholder. This Kogo Nada essay was also found on the earlier Blu-ray. It's approximately 9 minutes. The focus of this essay is, I would say, the concept of the gaze and the way that certain characters look at other characters in the film, and also how certain characters look straight at us, the viewer, the camera. this concept of the gaze, I think, is so remarkable and so significant because we see, and the Kogonada essay explores this so well, we see how a specific instance in the film indicates how Fellini uses the point of view perspective of the camera, while at the same time breaking such perspective in one shot, in a bravura camera move and technique that will essentially be echoed with great confidence in later films that we will see from 8.5 and Juliet and the Spirits onwards, and how the camera seems to be a point of view shot from a character on the one hand, and then all of a sudden turns into a sort of an objective or third-person perspective point of view with that character suddenly in the frame, as it were. So this becomes a break of the first-person perspective into a third-person perspective in one continuous shot, which is something that we, as I say, we will see a lot in later films by Fellini. But we see that kernel here, and in fact, the Kogonada essay refers to it as one of the most significant aspects of Fellini's cinema. It's almost a revolutionary moment in Fellini's cinema, and I'm so glad it's being highlighted in this fashion. And he also makes the point about how this gaze into the camera and the way that it seems to be capturing the perspective of our main character, Marcello, how it seems also to be somehow speaking towards the way that the camera is being used to express what one can refer to as the corporeal and the ethereal. And I mean, corporeal means that which is part of the body, and ethereal means that which is part of the spiritual realm. So the body and the spirit, or body and mind. And it seems to be that the thesis behind this essay is to suggest that the way that the gaze and the look of characters looking into the camera, seems to be a way that, and then how this is broken off, seems to be a way that characters seem to be breaking free from the corporeal realms of the point of view perspective into the ethereal, that is breaking free from their bounds, and then maybe that is somehow a kind of reflection of the characters' perspectives. And I find this to be a very compelling thesis. Assuming that I'm describing it correctly, and of course it's possible that I'm not, but I would probably say that maybe in conjunction with such thesis, I think it could also be said that the certain examples of characters looking into the camera that are cited by Kogonada in the essay, I think also could point to a sense of detachment, and also can point not just to the concept of the corporeal and the ethereal, but also to a sense of the continuing spiral of moral decay to the point of no return. And I think that's also something that's very significant when we see characters turn into the camera. There's almost this sense of the look being a direct SOS, if you will, a character almost subliminally calling to us for help and assistance. And I think that is a sign of the panic, as it were, of a kind of moral decay. Also, the way in which those scenes are juxtaposed with capturing the sense of innocence. And I think the look to the camera is also capturing the sense of innocence and warmth, almost a childlike innocence that is, of course, very much a part of the iconic shots that are being discussed specifically by Kogonada here. There's also an interesting discussion about how it seems like according to the essay, it seems to be, in a way, a certain break with neo-realistic traditions, which I think is an interesting way of looking at it. Of course, I think the opposite is also quite possible, in that the look into the camera is, in many ways, the ultimate expression of a type of realism or truth in cinema, which, in those terms, could be said to be very much in keeping with Italian neorealism traditions. But the point is that this essay brings up a whole wealth of possibility and further discussion, and so it's well presented, and it's very clear, and it's very stylish and clever, and so I love this type of essay. Approximately 9 minutes. And then going further, we have another supplement that was also found on the earlier Blu-ray, which is a one-on-one interview with Lina Wertmüller. And she is very significant in the world of Fellini because she served as an assistant director on this film and also on Otto e Mezzo, an 8.5. And this excerpt, an interview with her, is approximately 7 to 8 minutes. And she reminds us in her comments about Fellini's early days, Mark Aurelio, and his career as an artist and storyteller. And also she describes him as being a kind of genius and playmate and a kind of rascal. And he and Marcello Mastroianni were together very friendly, and they had this rascal-like temperament and character about them, which I think is Lina Wertmüller's way of affectionately describing who Fellini was. And there's a really funny episode where she's talking about Fellini one day, and how should I describe it? Let me borrow a phrase that's used by the character of Hercule Poirot in the Sidney Lumet film Murder on the Orient Express from the early 1970s. But Lina Wertmüller is talking about Fellini and how Fellini is, shall we say, is displaying the eye that he has for the figure of a receding woman. And so it's a very funny episode that she recounts, but it's also very indicative of the type of person and artist that Fellini was, being able to capture and identify specific details of day-to-day human life, which I think is very much at the heart of Fellini's cinema. So I think it's a very charming, heartwarming, and funny story that she recounts. Again, this is the interview, approximately 7 to 8 minutes. A really great one. That's not all, because then we get a 14-minute or so one-on-one interview. This is with Professor Forgash, David Forgash, which is also found on the earlier Blu-ray, and this is approximately 2000, circa 2014. And this is one of the best, so essential, because it goes into the idea of the historical basis and context of the film La Dolce Vita, 1960, the economic boom, the Olympics, but also how this seems to be receding into the background. I mean, he's suggesting also that the film is not a positive depiction necessarily of the economic miracolo, or the miracle that seems to be existing as Italy is exiting the 1950s and the post-war era, the immediate post-war era, into an economic development. But these elements don't necessarily get their attention in a positive light necessarily, but again in the context of La Dolce Vita, the story, because it is arguably a story about decadence and about maybe this idea of sloth and decadence. As depicted in these various party scenes and the nightlife, etc. So that is, I think, for Professor Forgash's hypothesis, which is very compelling, and I subscribe to it 100%. He also goes into great detail, much better than I could ever hope to explain it, in terms of the way that dynamism and dualities are expressed, old Rome versus new Rome, what he calls the building boom. I mean, there are some instances of shots of scenes that suggest construction going on. There's some shots of the Olympics structures, the rise of the media, and he refers to the old remnants of Italy as being expressed as a kind of a heritage Rome that relied on, say, the tourist industry, but then now it's giving rise to, as I say, new money class, and then a growing economy. But the tourist aspect of Rome is still being expressed in this film in some of the famous sequences, like the Trevi Fountain sequence, which is probably one of the most famous sequences in all of cinema. But that is, according to Professor Forgash, also an expression of old versus new, and I find that a very persuasive argument that he has, and it also leads into his other descriptions of the film, about how it was described by Fellini as being a type of fresco, a Baroque fresco, a Picasso-like deconstruction of characters, which I think is very apt, because it is, as I say, I think also a very painful emotionally painful deconstruction of a community and also a character or characters. So I find this to be a very compelling argument. He also talks about the idea of the game of mirrors aspect to the film. There's a sense of the descent into hell, but also the joie de vivre. An example being the way that the Via Veneto, this place in the city, is being shown in the film as almost a cross-section of many different cultures and classes, but that are all meeting in this level of decadence and extravagance. So fantastic stuff. And this is a great interview with Professor Forgash, who is an expert in Italian cinema and an expert in Fellini. So you have to check it out if you haven't already. Once again, it was part of the earlier supplement section of the earlier Blu-ray, but it's great to have it here as part of the Essential Fellini set. But that's not all, because then we also have another one-on-one interview with journalist Antonello Sarno. And this is a great one, approximately 15 minutes. Again, also from 2014. This is so great because he goes into so many details about the making of the film. He goes into the anecdote about the producers, Amato and Rizzoli. In particular, Amato. There's a famous story that is recounted elsewhere in some supplements about how the story about how one of the producers in a show of defiance against Fellini in some form took an ink bottle and attempted to drink it as a sign of sort of an act of defiance, if you will. He not realizing that there was no cap to the ink bottle, and so instead what happened was he drank some of the ink and it spilled all over his shirt. This is producer Amato. Well, apparently, according to Sarno, this is in the context of having received the first draft of the film screenplay from Fellini, which is a very interesting anecdote about the relationship between the producers and the director. There's also discussion of Gherardi, who is very important in the world of the creative world of Fellini in terms of the production design and fashion. And I like how Sarno describes Gherardi as being almost like what we would know today as an image stylist or image consultant, because we understand that Gherardi had a lot of input into many of the creative choices in the film, all the way down to the looks of the characters, such as Marcello. So that is very, very exciting. And he also talks about iconic aspects of the fashion. He gives a great example of the really famous wardrobe worn by Anita Ekberg in the San Pietro sequence, and so that is really famous, and it's going into very directly a discussion of religiosity, or the religious, and decadence and fashion, which is, I think, very much a part of this kind of elements of contradiction that are inherent in this film. So that's a wonderful discussion there. And also he talks about how this film has a type of television commercial-like aesthetic to it. Some of the sequences can be described as being like Fellini shooting TV commercials. And this aesthetic is present not just visually, as Sarno might suggest, but also in the way that characters are engaged with each other. There's this way of a TV commercial aesthetic where characters meet and they suddenly they bond and they become fast friends. And there's this type of quickness in the way that certain human bonds are forged between specific characters in this film, thus giving rise to what Sarno would probably describe as being an aesthetic based in commercials and TV, which I find a really fascinating thing, because then it leads into a discussion, as Sarno guides us, into a discussion about how this film seems also to be about the brand of Italy and brand of Rome, and how this is suggestive of a way of life and idea. And La Dolce Vita becomes this famous thing. Again, the phenomenon that is La Dolce Vita, and how it gives rise to the prominence of the fashion world and the idea of made in Italy, and Schubert, and and the development of this high class and style that we know today. And he also talks about other aspects, going back into the film itself. He talks about other aspects, about a description of a deleted scene or cut scene from the film, and also the idea of the expression of joie de vivre and the like. Really, it's such a packed interview, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic, and it really ends also in a way that is actually quite surprising in terms of how personal it is in describing Fellini and his relationship with Giulietta Mazzina, and also the way in which Fellini seemed to react to certain aspects of the critical reception of La Dolce Vita in the form of what the film would be next, which would be Otto e Mezzo, or 8.5. So really, really excellent material here in this interview with Sarno. Again, approximately 15 minutes. But that's not all, because we then get a supplement which actually was not found on the earlier Blu-ray, as far as I understand it. And this supplement is from 2009, and it is called Once Upon a Time, La Dolce Vita. And this is approximately 52 minutes. This is maybe a documentary about perhaps the making of the film, but it goes again into certain details that were discussed in other supplements. For example, it does rely a little bit on the footage of the second look episodes, and so we get some of the repeats of the excerpts of the interviews with Fellini, for example. We also get some new interviews with, for example, Anouk Aimée, where she talks about working with Fellini and the like. That's very informative. Also, we get here a great discussion of the history of the word paparazzi and the etymology, or discussion of the etymology of the word, which is one of the classic aspects of this film, and the history about how this word, which is so famous, it's used even now, how this word was generated and became known. So that is an interesting discussion as well. We also get other details that we saw expressed in other supplements, but we see them, I think, filled out in terms of specificity, which I like. For example, in some past or other supplements, there was mention of the fact that the famous Trevi Fountain scene and Anita Ekberg and going into the fountain, right? How this has its roots in something that really happened. And this is referred to in another supplement, but here it's given a specificity in terms of Pratulon and Tempo Illustrato. So I like how this film, or this supplement, is filling in some of those gaps of specificity. And so that makes this supplement, Once Upon a Time, La Dolce Vita, be very, very valuable indeed. I think it's wonderful to have. Again, approximately 52 minutes. And then we have on this Blu-ray disc what is known as Felliniana, which is this photo, what do you call it? It's one of these things where you push the button to navigate through a photo gallery of lobby cards and artwork and programs and books and magazine covers and soundtrack covers as well. That is also the same, as far as I understand it, with what we got in terms of the Felliniana in the earlier Blu-ray here. So that is carried over. It's really lovely to see. I should point out, too, that the earlier Blu-ray also had an audio interview with Marcello Mastroianni. That's not found on this disc, but we may see it in another disc later. In fact, we will see it in another disc later, so don't worry about that. So, Intervista. But for now, just note that one of the supplements that's found here is not found on the La Dolce Vita disc for Essential Fellini, but is found elsewhere in the Essential Fellini box set. I think that pretty much is that when it comes to what we have as far as the supplements and this film La Dolce Vita. I think the supplements journey is so helpful because it really does illuminate and shed light on a film that, as I suggest, is very complex and very rich and nuanced. It is also so cool and so much an epitome of the style and class and ultra cool sense that is Federico Fellini's cinema at this time. And it also feels like it is an extension of his cinema that we saw in the 1950s, but also arguably a break with what we saw from the 1950s, thus ushering in maybe the next phase, as it were, of Fellini's career. It indeed is a new decade, the 1960s. And my goodness, what a way to start. Not just a reflection of the city and the society at the time, but also a reflection of Federico Fellini, the man, the artist, the legend, in this film, La Dolce Vita. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. So thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate it. I hope you are enjoying your Fellini journeys. And in any event, please continue to be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, thank you and cheers.